Shir Amalois, Malakim Krosti Adonai. Adonai Shmoi Kali, Chaz Nacha Kashu Lois Lokal Tachanoi. Adonai Tishmaria, Adonai Miyamoi. Kim Khasli Khal Manti Varei. Visi Adonai Kivasan Afshi, Livaroi Khalti. Nafshi Adonai Mishayim Laboiker, Shayim Laboiker. Achel Yisrael Adonai, Kim Adonai Acheser, V'Arbei Imai Fidus. Guru Yivdas Yisrael, Mikol Adonai Sor.
The Masvidim will be Rabbi Yisrael Langer, the Rav of Beis Yitzchak, followed by Michael, followed by Mr. Paul Bernstein's son-in-law, on behalf of his wife Rochelle, and his sister-in-law Deborah, then followed by grandson Elliot Bernstein, then Joey Silverstein, then Marvin Loskove. So we're not going to call them up again, everybody knows the order. So we're going to begin now with Rabbi Langer.
If one were to try to say a hesped, a Moshe Rabbeinu, we would think it would take many hours. Yet the Torah, when being maspid Moshe Rabbeinu, says two words. It says, Hayomas Sham Moshe, Moshe died, Eved Hashem, servant of Hashem. The prototype Eved is this last week's Parsha, Eliezer Eved Avram. The Torah records in great detail the entire story, an entire parsha of Eliezer, who's going, he's sent by Avram, his master, to find a shidduch for Yitzchak. And the Torah records all the conversations that Eliezer has with Rivka. And then it repeats it over a second time when he discusses it over with Besuel and Lavan in such great lengths. Yet when it comes to the mitzvahs of the Torah is very cryptic. Just tells us sometimes mitzvahs in remuzim, in a way of a hint. And Rashi makes note of this. Rashi tells us, Yafa sichasan shel avdei avos. More pleasing are the conversations of the servants of the avos, l'fnei ha'makayim yitarasan shel banim. It's more pleasing for Hashem to go through at length. He got discussing in the Torah these conversations that the servants of the avos have. What is so pleasing? What brings such great pleasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu about the conversations of the servants of the avos? I thought perhaps to suggest that we see a tremendous amount of dedication on the part of Eliezer. Eliezer really wanted that his daughter should get married to Yitzchak. Avram tells him no. We would think Eliezer now could become somewhat rebellious, or at least very upset and hurt and pained. But the Torah goes into great detail showing the devotion, the dedication that Eliezer has towards his master. And throughout the conversations we see this devotion that Eliezer has to carry out his job. And this perhaps is what the Torah is trying to relate to us. This is what gives so much pleasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to have devotion, such loyalty loyalty to our family, loyalty to Klal Yisrael, and most of all, loyalty to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is the praise of Moshe Rabbeinu, Eved Hashem, the servant of Hashem, faithful, loyal, and devoted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When I think of Mr. Loskove, alav shalom, these are the traits. This is what depicts him: loyalty and devotion. He grew up in Memphis. In Memphis, he was one of 2, maybe 3 Shomer Shabbos families. We take for granted we have here today in Chicago our friends, our circles, everybody in our shul, everybody is Shomer Shabbos, we observe Shabbos. It's easy. Just be part of the crowd. He was one of 2 or 3 Shomer Shabbos families. He went to public school. Went to a Talmud Torah 2 times a week. All his friends Friday night were going out and having a good time. He was home, observing Shabbos. We see today, look what it produced. His children, his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, every single one of them, Shomer Shabbos. My wife's grandfather used to quote his father as saying, "You watch over Shabbos, and Shabbos will watch over you." He was loyal to Klal Yisrael. He grew up, he had a public school education. Yet he was very active in maintaining the Memphis Hebrew Day School, making sure his children and the community have an education, a Torah education for their children. He's the one who started the Yeshiva of the South, a boys' high school, a girls' high school. He raised the funds for it. He understood that Torah education is of primary importance. And he was so dedicated to tefillah, to shul. I saw him over the last 5 years. I was Rabbi Beis Yitzchak. Started out walking to shul, eventually had to move on to a walker, to a wheelchair, but he didn't miss. I used to come home from shul, I would tell my wife, Mr. Loskove was there today. Couldn't believe it. 10 degrees outside, snowing. He didn't miss. He wouldn't miss. And when he came to daven, it wasn't to eat sholent, it was to daven. He came to shul to daven. He didn't talk to people next to him. He sat there and he davened. A few years ago, Yom Kippur, in the Elah, he refused to sit down. A man by his 90s. He wouldn't sit. How could he sit by Ne'ilah? He couldn't walk for a few weeks after because he pushed himself to stand for the entire Ne'ilah. That's dedication. That's loyalty. That's being an Eved Hashem. His devotion and loyalty to Mrs. Loskove. You could see the love and the devotion they both had for each other. My wife and I always marveled that these are role models. They were always in Shana Rishayna. Always newlyweds. A couple of months ago in shul, Mr. Loskove was, because of his illness, medications. Sometimes he got a little bit confused. And Michael warned me, my father's a little bit confused today. He was in shul. At the Kiddush, he asks me if I could officiate at his wedding tomorrow. Officiate at his wedding? Yes, I'd like to get married to this woman, pointing to his wife. I said, sure. He asks me, do you think it's a good shidduch? I said, yeah. I said, why? I think it's perfect for you, I told him. And he nodded his head, yes, it is perfect. Even in a state of confusion, he understood what's right for him. This is who he was loyal to. This is his wife. The love and devotion was there throughout. the devotion he had to his children, to his grandchildren. He never missed a graduation. He never missed a Chumash play. All of Mrs. Edward Silverstein's political events, the victory celebrations, he looked forward to them. He was so proud of all his children and grandchildren, all their accomplishments. And they in return reciprocated towards him. You could see the dedication that his children and grandchildren had towards him, especially in these last years, always by his side, the patience, the care, the love. On a personal level, just the good Shabbos, that warm good Shabbos that he would give me week after week, that smile, that warmth. I am certainly going to miss him. I'm sure we're all going to miss him very much. Bila hamavas lenetzach umacha Hashem Elokim dima me'al kol panim.
I was thinking of what I could say for my father. I realized his entire life, his entire being, his entire essence was a living embodiment of the Kiddush Hashem. No formal Jewish education. As Rabbi Laker said, never learned in yeshiva. Very few from role models as he was growing up. And yet, every aspect of his life was the Kiddush Hashem. Most of what I'm going to say was a partnership that he had with my mother. She should live and be well, 120. His entire life was an intense dedication to his wife and his family. And he was an incredible role model of how you live your life as a frum Jew. He was incredibly patriotic to this country. From his early days, as Rabbi Langer had mentioned, his early days on Friday night when all of his friends were out, he was at home on Shabbos. But as he got a little bit older, he enrolled in ROTC to serve in the Air Force. But every aspect of his service in the Air Force, as patriotic as he was built around Yiddishkeit, was built around how could he maintain his frumkeit while serving in the Air Force. He enrolled in ROTC so that he could become an officer, so that he would be able to have quarters that would allow him to put on tefillin when he was still serving in the Air Force. The sacrifices he made for his diet while he was in the Air Force. Every leave that he had while in the Air Force was built around Yom Tov so that he could be home for Pesach. He went to an officer's meal with one of the generals, and he wasn't eating, and every one of his colleagues was saying, "You are going to be in such trouble. The general is not going to be happy with you." Afterwards, he went up and explained to the general. The general looked at him, shook his hand and said, "Your parents would be so proud of you." Tremendous Kiddush Hashem. He then met the love of his life. My parents had an incredible partnership. We were so going to celebrate their 65th wedding anniversary a few weeks ago. They had a partnership par excellence. As Rabbi Laker said, to see them together, to watch them care for each other, concern for each other, the love, the sweetness, the dedication, and yes, the fighting. My kids used to always give them a bracha that Bubby and Zadie should be able to live and be well and continue fighting for many, many, many years to come. My sister, I remember my sister when my father was starting to decline, and we had to get some caregivers to come into the house. My sister made a comment that it's going to be so hard because you see them, you watch them sitting at the table together, eating breakfast, eating together, watching each other, helping each other. And it was so sweet. It was so sweet to watch them together. They were the epitome, in my opinion, of a Kiddush Hashem. They emulated exactly what a HaKadosh Baruch Hu would want a husband and a wife to be, and the way they raise their family, and the way they support each other. And that, to me, is an incredible Kiddush Hashem. And that even wore off. I know I have to thank Randy. I have to acknowledge Randy for everything that she's done in helping me and allowing me to be there. But that is absolutely a reflection of my father and my parents being that role model for us. From there, they became and they were the most incredible parents, the most incredible parents that there could be. And you can see that in the incredible love that every one of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren have for them and for my father. My father was incredibly supportive at every single event, at every single activity that we could have. And if you messed with any of his kids, my best wishes to you, because you were going to get the full force of my father. Nobody could mess with his children. Nobody could bother his children. And yes, he was a disciplinarian, but it was all out of love. It was all out of caring. It was all for the emphasis, as I said earlier, how do you live your life as a frum Jew? That's what my father was. That's what he did. A tremendous Kiddush Hashem. The model, in my opinion, the model of how HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that a parent is supposed to raise their children. Two other aspects that I have to say. One, my father, really my parents together, an amazing, amazing role model for Kibbutz Avim. What we saw, I was very young when my Zadie passed away. I was 7 years old, I think. And they cared for my bubby for 20 plus years. My father was, my father was the primary caregiver for my bubby. He would check on her twice a day, every single day. Come out every single Shabbos that she would come to us and she would stay at our house. At my bubby's Levaya, Rav Nutta Greenblatt was one of the Masbidim. and he made a comment that the activities of Kibbutz of Abe that he had seen in caring for my puppy was the greatest act in his life that he had ever seen of Kibbutz of Abe. Many people have commented to me and to us how impressed they've been by the way we've treated our parents. That was absolutely earned, and that was absolutely a learned behavior on our part, and we pale in comparison to the kibbutz of aim that my parents provided to my bubby. And my last point, all of this culminates. Everything that he did was for his family. Everything that he did was for us. And that includes his incredible dedication, Rabbi Langer said, to the community, to our education, to the respect that he had for Talmidei Chachamim, for the efforts that he put in on behalf of the shul. Everything that he did was to benefit us and to benefit the community. The hours and hours and hours that he spent. He was served as president of the Memphis Hebrew Academy. He had an incredibly close relationship with Rav Meir Belsky, the Rosh Yeshiva of the Yeshiva of the South, to raise money for the yeshiva for one purpose, so we could have a Jewish education. All of us could have a Jewish education. An incredible effort for us. The kavod that he provided to Talmidei Chachamim, the kavod that my parents provided to Rav Ephraim Greenblatt. They were very, very close friends. There were very few from families in Memphis when the Greenblatts arrived. They were close friends for years and years and years. And after Mrs. Greenblatt was in a terrible accident that eventually took her life, Rabbi Greenblatt ate by my parents every Friday night and every Shabbos morning. Every single week, my father would walk him home, escort him home from every single meal. It did not matter. The incredible kavod that was provided by him to a tremendous Talmid Chacham. And again, as Rabbi Langer said, his incredible devotion to shul. Being in shul was everything to him. Whether it was 100+ degrees in Memphis and he had to walk to shul, whether it was 20 below zero in Chicago and he had to walk to shul, whether I remember during COVID when we would go visit him and we would just walk around the outside, the only thing he would say is, he was in his late 80s, he says, I'm never going to be able to go to shul again. He could not process that, giving up shul. And then late in life, we had to go in a wheelchair. Every single crack of the street, every single bump we hit, there was pain shooting through his back. And he would never miss. I think every aspect of my father's life was a Kiddush Hashem. So I need to wrap up. I need to thank a few people. I need to thank, first of all, as I mentioned earlier, I need to thank Randy, Paul, the in-law children, the grandchildren, everybody who has been incredible in allowing us to care for him and allowing us in their own right caring for him and doing the things that are necessary. I have to thank our incredible caregivers for the last year plus, June, Lita, Peter, others. All of our caregivers have been absolutely incredible, and most of all, Amelda, amazing Amelda, who has cared for my father with such love. We have to thank her. I have to thank the incredible community of Chicago, Hatzalah, the Chicago Center, the Chicago Chesed Fund, the Chicago Mitzvah Campaign, every one of which has been incredibly supportive and helpful in caring for my father. all I can do now is ask for Mechila for my father. For anything that I may have done that was not the government. He should live in the future for our family. For all of Claudia's role. And we should emulate it in every possible way. Bilang this letter stuff. We all call funny.
Here's my wife with Rochelle. Of all the tasks thus far in my life, one of the most difficult was to find the appropriate words to show honor, love, and respect to my most wonderful father. How can I find words for someone who was my everything? My rock that held me together in good times and bad, my protector if I was ever in need, my confidant if there were ever any discussions to be had, and most importantly, my teacher and guide through life. My father taught me to be a religious Jew. Since he only had a Talmud Torah education, he did not necessarily teach us how to read, write, and learn. He taught us how to be strong in our beliefs and gave us a lifelong devotion to being Shomer Shabbos and kosher. As you have heard, he was not surrounded by Orthodox Jews growing up in high school. When he knew he would be drafted, he already had the foresight to join our OTC, so that when drafted, he would enter as an officer and have a private room to put tefillin on every morning. You are not taught this in school. You are taught this by example. He taught us how to respect other people, how to stand up when someone older or in a higher position walked into a room. He taught us how to speak with derech eretz, even if he didn't know what those words meant. This you don't learn in high school. This, again, you learn by example. He taught us kibbud av v'em in the way he, along with my mother, treated their own parents. The kavod given to them was an example to our entire family. He taught us how to love. Our mother was the love of his life. He showered her with his devotion, dedication, and kindness that cannot be learned by just saying, Eishes Chayil. He lived it every day of their 65 years together. His devotion to his children knew no bounds, and together, with our mother, showered us with love, protection, and all of life's lessons, never missing a moment in our lives or the lives of our children and grandchildren. And that devotion speaks for itself as you look at the first few rows and see that every grandchild is here in attendance today. Our father taught us devotion and faith in Hashem. When my father held his siddur to his chest and closed his eyes and prayed to Hashem, a sense of peace and well-being filled the room. Even when his health declined, with the help of my mother, he put on talis and tefillin every morning. For those who didn't have the opportunity to know him well, you know that he was a man of faith, devotion to his wife, his family, his community. We thank you, Dad. We love you and hope you will watch over us and continue to daven for us, and I hope that you know that you will always be with us. We love you. Here's my sister-in-law, Deborah. What can I say about a man who has been my rock, my protector, my confidant, my friend, and my role model? My father has been such an integral part of my life from the day I was born. We have always been a very close-knit family. As children, we always ate breakfast together every morning, and then we all sat down for dinner every night at 5:30. We went to the Memphis State basketball games on Saturday nights, and we watched All in the Family, Carol Burnett, and Mary Tyler Moore in the evenings. Dad helped us with our homework. He cheered us on at our ballet recitals, piano recitals, and sports games. Throughout my political career, Dad and Mom attended every single event and were always so proud. Family was the most important thing to my father. If anyone crossed us, then look out for Marvin Joseph Loskove, the MJL as we called it. He was always there to protect us, to encourage us, to tell us how proud he was of us, and to tell us that everything was going to be okay. We always felt that Dad had a direct line to Hashem. If we needed prayers, we would go to Dad, and he would pull out his siddur, hold it to his chest, and down harder than anyone else. We felt that when Dad said everything will be okay, he somehow had gotten the message to Hashem. He was always right. He also had a special love for his queen, my mother. I am so happy and blessed that my kids were able to witness the beautiful love that my parents shared with each other. Don't worry, Dad, we'll take care of Mom. Dad, your job is not over. You are on a new journey now. After you are reunited with your parents, your sister, and your baby that you lost so many years ago, we ask that you continue to advocate for us, that you ask God to bless us with good health, mazel, simcha, and bracha. You are leaving this world, but you are never really leaving us. You will always be in our hearts and our memories. We said I loved you over and over again the last few months. Dad, thank you for being the greatest father on this earth. Please forgive me for anything that I may have done or said that could have upset you, and for the final time, I love you, my father. On a personal note, in Parshat Vayera and Chayei Sarah, we learn of the overwhelming trait that defines Avram Avinu, and that was chesed. Whether he was welcoming guests into his tent, whether he was trying to advocate with Hashem to save Sodom, whether he was negotiating for a kever for his beloved wife Sarah, chesed was what defined Avram Avinu. And I can say, in the 42 or so years that I knew my father-in-law, that was his guiding principle in life as well. I remember when I first went down to Memphis, I'd been dating my wife Rochelle, and we were going down, it was going to be the engagement. I'd never met them, I'd never spoken with them, and I was a little terrified of what I was going to run into when I got there. But I found someone who opened his house and his heart and his family to me as if I was family, as if I was a son. For many years, my wife and my children and I were fortunate to be able to spend every Pesach for the entire Yom Tov down in Memphis. And I can only imagine all the tumult and all the effort and all the trouble that they went to make us at home for this period of time. Pesachs were memorable and unforgettable. So I will always carry that chesed with me and remember the chesed he showed to me, our family, his family, and to the community at large. Thank you.
As I look back to Zadie's life, there are so many things that jump out to me about the amazing, loving grandfather that he was to me and to all of my siblings and cousins, and so many memories. And there are too many to share, but what I want to do is focus on the ones that I think are really extra special. It was obvious to me from a very young age how important family was to Zadie. Family was really all that mattered to him. Throughout my elementary school years, my family would take many trips to Memphis to visit our grandparents. They were legendary 9-hour drives through beautiful cities like Mount Vernon and Effingham and Cairo, the beautiful West Memphis, Arkansas, beautiful places, beautiful to go over there. But what it meant to us was a trip to see our grandparents, to see Bubby and Zadie. And I always remember, as we always got there, right around dinner time, they were always ready to greet us with a big smile. Zadie was there, a big hug, a big kiss, a fleet of really old bicycles that we used to come out and just jump and ride on 2 minutes after we got there. But really, I learned a lot about Zadie on those trips. As a young boy, I recall the love and the care that Zadie gave to his mother, who used to spend every Shabbos with Bubby and Zadie. I recall on trips to Memphis, Zadie would take me and Joshua to Bub's apartment on Mount Moriah Street, where Josh and I would enjoy running up and down the stairs to Bub's second floor apartment while Zadie would tend to all of Bub's needs and then bring her home so that he and Bubby could take care of her. I always knew that Zadie had a tremendous heart and would do anything for his family. It was these early memories of how he stepped up for his mother that began to frame for me the man he was and what we all should strive to be. And I realized that this trait has also passed down through the generations, seeing how my mother and Uncle Michael and Aunt Deborah used to take care of Zadie, especially near the end of his life. It's very clear and obvious that these traits have trickled down through the generations, and I pray that they will continue to do so with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren and even future generations as well. Up until 8th grade, the only Pesach Seder that I ever knew was the one that Bubby and Zadie would put on in their den in Memphis with the entire family in attendance. Webster's Dictionary, or since it's 2023, we'll say Wikipedia, were to define happiness. The picture of Zadie at home on Pesach would have to be inserted somewhere. There was nothing more special to him than Pesach, where he would beg us not to steal his afikomen, occasionally, I guess, try to inspire us with his Eliyahu Hanavi costume, and on many occasions, coming to join, when I was a very young boy, coming to join us in the playground right next to Anshe Sfard. which as a young boy I can still remember him doing. And while he never could convince me to join the Anshe choir for Anim Zamiro, despite his and Mr. Riesenberg's constant prodding, I like to think that I made up for it when I was a young boy by running to him after he finished Birkat Kohanim, before he had left the Duchen. This is what Zaidi lived for. This was what was important to him. He never gave up an opportunity to spend time with his grandchildren, and I'm so lucky to have so many memories of those Memphis days. Whether I've been to a Memphis Tigers game, a Memphis Chicks game, yes, there was a baseball team called the Chicks back in the day. He used to take us there, and he was in all of his glory. As I got to high school, the trips to Memphis became infrequent, and they would eventually end my senior year when, after years of rumors, Bubby and Zaidi moved from their house in Memphis to Winston Towers. And I remember trying to decide if I actually wanted this move to happen or not. And the reason was not because I was genuinely unsure if the magic of seeing Bubby and Zaidi in Memphis would continue to exist when they were only a couple blocks away here in Chicago. And I realized very quickly that being with my grandparents is more than just an adventure to another city. When Zaidi would have the exact same twinkle in his eye, seeing us in his condo as he did when we came to his house in Memphis, I realized that his love of us and our love of him was what defined our relationship and is what made it special. The same feelings of happiness and love of being around Zaidi could be felt just as strongly at Great Chicago as it could be felt at TCDY in Memphis. It was not Memphis that made Zaidi special. It was Zaidi that made Memphis special and made everybody around him special. Zaidi's love and caring for us knew no bounds. He would spend hours trying to tutor me in math. He could not stop smiling when he saw me eat my first piece of herring. And on the flip side, I will never forget also the bit of the shock when I told him I was going to be the next president of my shul in Teaneck. And of course, I'll never forget when I introduced Zaidi to Adina for the very first time, hearing him tell Adina that he loved her just as much as she loved me, even though he had known her for exactly 2 minutes. And just how excited he was for me and for my future family. It is not lost on me that I'm in a very unique situation. Being minutes away from 40, to say that I had a grandfather and I knew a grandfather for 40 years is something that you almost never hear of. It's even rarer to see someone who has both a Bubby and a Zaidi married for 65 years, as I have with Bubby and Zaidi. I never knew my great-grandfathers, yet my children have all been zocheh to meet their great Zaidi and be blessed by him, have memories of him, and in certain situations have him daven for them. I would be remiss to say that something that was just very inspiring to me as this all has taken place is that my son Tani, who was here, hi Tani, to hear him say that he wanted to go to school on Friday and to daven and to learn in honor of his great Zaidi, considering all the davening that great Zaidi did for him in the first 15 months of his life, to me was very inspiring and something that I will never forget. Great Zaidi lived a long and a very good life devoted to Orthodox Judaism, which is practiced by all of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And while his physical life has ended, his neshama lives on in all of us and gives us the blueprint of the life that we and our children can and shall live up to. Zaidi, we love you. We thank you for being a strong role model and guiding force in our lives, and may your memory be a blessing for us and for all of our future generations.
Thank you everyone for coming today to help us remember our beloved Zaidi. Our Zaidi was the person we all looked up to. He was the patriarch of our family, and we knew he always had our backs in the good and the bad times. Some of our greatest memories growing up were with Bubby and Zaidi. Every summer and Pesach, we would pile in the minivan and take an 8-hour drive down to Memphis. We did the drive so many times, but we always had to call Zaidi to find out if we should exit at Jackson or at Little Rock. When we got there, Bubby and Zaidi were always standing in the front door with their arms wide open. Zaidi would pull out his fishing rods, and we spend long afternoons trying to catch sardines, which we never caught. Our trips to Memphis were filled with funny bedtime stories, feeding the ducks, ice cream visits to TCBY, and of course threatening to serve us frog legs if we didn't behave. We got to learn more about Zaidi when Bubby and Zaidi decided to move to Chicago. Having them close by, Zaidi became our math tutor, our landscaper, our painter, our handyman, our babysitter. And when our parents went out of town, we were always excited because we got to sleep at Bubby and Zadie's and get serenaded by Zadie's one-of-a-kind songs. Zadie attended all of our school graduations, sport events, birthday parties. We would call Zadie to get updates on the Chicago weather from Finkel and get predictions for the sporting events, since somehow Zadie had his connections with the sports teams in town. We would have many meals on Shabbos with Zadie where he would tell us how he grew up in Memphis, being Jewish and serving in the army as an Orthodox Jew and growing up during the time of segregation. It was during these conversations that we learned his values and what he stood for. He taught us to stand up for what we believe in and never take no for an answer. Zadie was a God-fearing man and made sure to pray and put on tefillin every single day, which was very inspiring. He taught us the importance of being a good son, a good father, and a good husband. His love for Bubby was seen by all, and it has taught us the definition of what true love really means. His most prized possession was his family. We saw how important it was for Zadie to make an effort to become interested in what we liked, whether it was Torah, sports, math, science. Zadie took the time to learn these topics because he wanted to connect with us and have a relationship with us. That relationship created a bond that we will miss every day. Zadie, your actions and the way you lived your life has inspired all of us, and we will pass down the lessons that you have taught us to our children. We love you, and we miss you very, very much.
Yesterday in Parshat Chayei we read, the Parsha starts off, Vayu Chayei Shnei Meir Shanim ve'esrim Shana v'sheva Shanim Shnei Chayei that Sarah lived for 127 years. These are the years of the life of Sarah. So Rashi there says, Shnei Chayei why the pasuk kept to tell us at the end again, the years of the life of Sarah? Rashi says, Kulam Shavim L'Taiva, that all of Sarah's years were equally good. So Ramesha Feinstein asks on that Rashi, that how could you say that Sarah's years were all equally good? The first 90 years of her life, she didn't have any children. She was abducted by Paro and Avimelech. She had to deal with Hagar and Ishmael. How could all of those years been equally good? So Ramesha says that Ram and Sarah lived a life of chesed. They lived a life of avodas Hashem. Their avodah was chesed. Everything that happened in Sarah's life was unrelated to what her purpose was. Her whole life she was able to do her avodah of chesed, and for that we could say that all of her life was good, or it's equally good. I think this vart can define Zadie in many ways. Zadie definitely went through a lot in his life. He grew up in Memphis, Tennessee in the 30s and 40s, with Shaimer Shabbos, with nobody else. He spent 2 years in the Air Force by himself. He lost a child in infancy. He went through a lot of pain that probably most of us don't even know how much he went through. But through it all, his main focus was his avodas Hashem. When he was in the Air Force, he made sure to keep kosher. I remember there's a story he told me. I know he didn't know how much the story meant to me when he said it, because I just want to say first that there's a Gemara in Gittin which says the story about a certain tzaddik who was over on the aver of eating Ever Min HaChai. And Taisus there asked that how is it possible for a tzaddik to be over to eat Ever Min HaChai? Hashem protects tzaddikim from doing averis. And Taisus said that he didn't actually eat it, he was about to eat it and then he stopped. And there's a story Zadie told me one time that when he was in the Air Force, that he walked into the mess hall and he saw them serving baked beans. And he said that he was very excited because after eating just bread and potatoes, he was finally able to eat something that he enjoyed. And he said he took a bowl and he sat down at the table, and the person across from him said, "There's one thing the Air Force can't mess up, is good old pork and beans." And he got up and threw it out. He would talk very, very passionately about the starting of the Memphis Hebrew Academy. It was something he was very proud of. I remember him getting very passionate when he would talk about his wealthy irreligious cousins, and he would always tell me that they all think they made it big and they all got nothing. He knew that he was the one who had it. He would always make sure to go to shul, even when he was in a lot of pain. My father would always take him. no matter what. It's been mentioned many times before. However, what the weather was, however much pain he was in throughout the COVID pandemic, the thing that pained him the most was not being able to go to shul. As his pain got worse, his arms became very sore, and he remember what bothered him the most was he was afraid he would never be able to duchen again. He lived for that birchas koyanim. My father used to tell him that he's jealous. He waits for the day when his grandchildren could stand next to him and help him put his talus over his head. Yeah, my brother was just telling me that he remembers that at his own l'chaim that Zaidi was taking a new medication that made him very dizzy, and he had to eat before davening, which was something he couldn't bring himself to do. So they brought Rabbi Yaakov Horsheimer over, the Paisik in Lakewood, to tell him that you're allowed to eat before davening in your situation. That was the only thing that could convince Zaidi to eat before davening. And of course, the last thing we have to mention is Zaidi's devotion to putting on his tefillin. Zaidi was so careful about his tefillin when his arms became stiff and his fingers were stiff. Bubby used to help him put his tefillin on. It was something he wouldn't miss. I remember when after Zaidi years ago had a surgery, I remember standing there in his living room, and he told me he had a big neck brace around his neck. He could barely move, and he told me that Rabbi Cohen was just here a few days ago, and I told him that I'm in so much pain, my muscles are so stiff, and he told me that if you're really in that much pain, you could skip a day of tefillin, it's fine. And I told him that I spent 2 years in the Air Force. I had my own room in the Air Force, and I never missed a day of tefillin there. And there was 1 week where they were redoing my room, and I had to share a room with another officer. And every day, the other officer would go to breakfast, and I would tell him I'm not feeling well, and I would stay behind to put my tefillin on. I said I didn't miss a day of tefillin in the Air Force. I'm not missing a day of tefillin now. And every time I put my tefillin on, I feel like there's a ton of bricks weighing down on my arm. But I didn't miss my tefillin then, and I'm not missing them now. So Zaidi definitely lived a life devoted to Avodas Hashem. He had so much nachas from all of his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And so like we said, Zaidi definitely went through a lot in his life. But if we put it all into perspective of what Zaidi lived for, I think we can look back at the last 91 years and we can say, Kulam Shavim L'Taiva.
I don't know if it's proper to say this, I've never said it before in my life, but I've never been in Ohio. I've been so impressed by the way every single family member and the way Rabbi Langer all spoke about Mr. Loskove. Unbelievable. A human being is a sugya gedola. Sugya gedola means a very, very complex issue. That's the term we use for Gemaras. Sugya gedola. So I'd like to begin with a kasha that everybody really has asked, maybe not so explicitly. I asked this to Mrs. Loskove last night and all of the Loskove children. I grew up out of town. Until I was 11, I was in Crown Heights, but then we grew up out of town. My mother grew up in Millis, which is smaller than Memphis. How in the world did he make it? How did he make it? Same type of thing, no education, no day school. Didn't know what the inside of yeshiva looked like until maybe he was in his 20s or later. So I like to try to perhaps offer an answer. I'd like to begin by mentioning the Loskove name has been connected to my family for almost 50 years. My father, Louis Shalom, who didn't grow up in a small town, he grew up on the east side. And he was a Shem Shabbos, he went to yeshiva. He was always impressed with this man from Memphis, who in the entire insurance industry that he was in, with thousands of agents across the country, there were 4 or 5 people who were Shem Shabbos and Shem Kashrus on conventions. Conventions were very tempting, very tempting. And one of the names that was always mentioned was this Loskove from Memphis. He was one of the 3 or 4 agents in the entire company that was from. And they would sometimes share a hotel room together. Rashi, in Sefer Yoshua brings a medrash which is relevant to yesterday's parsha. I saw this medrash many years ago, forgot it, saw it yesterday afternoon. Nothing to do with Mr. Loskove. At least I thought so. Medrash HaGodel is on the pasuk that says, "V'shem Chevron ufanim Kiryas Arba Hodom HaGodel Ma'anokim," the great man among the giants. V'oretz Shokto Mimulcham. The Medrash says that the Canaanim, all of the nations that lived in Eretz Yisrael before Klal Yisrael got there, were given a 40-year reprieve before they were attacked by Klal Yisrael entering Eretz Yisrael. Klal Yisrael told them you could leave. They sent a letter, said all the non-Jews can leave, or we're coming to take over Eretz Yisrael. Yergoshi left, and the other nations stayed. Why were they given a 40-year reprieve? That while the Jews were in the Midbar for other reasons, the Canaanim had 40 years of peace. Yesterday's parsha, when Avram came to bury Sarah, they called Avram the Sea of Elohim, and they gave a Talmud Chacham covered. And for that reason, they were granted 40 years of peace. That's what the Medrash says. As was mentioned, Mr. Loskove's covered for Rabbi Greenblatt. Rabbi Frank Greenblatt was a world-renowned Talmud Chacham, and he gave him covered. He gave him covered. But I would like to talk about Mr. Loskove's covered to a person who was not a world-renowned Talmud Chacham. And the covet he displayed was off the charts, just because the person happened to be a Rav. That's me. When Mr. Loskove came to sell chametz, especially towards the end of his life, I told him, I'll come to your house. I'll come to your house. Don't come to shul. No, Rabbi, I wish I could imitate his southern accent as he was talking. No, Rabbi, no. For a few years, Michael came, Deborah came. We walked down the steps. Every step was painful. Hobble into my office, sit down, and wanted to sell his chametz. It was just an unbelievable. The Yirah Shamayim was oozing out of him. It was just oozing out of him. Oozing out of him. Nowadays, what sell chametz? Do it online. Why are you making me crazy to come in and sell the chametz? Fill out a form, but filling out a form. Shoot me an email. It says, for giving covet to Avram Avinu, they got 40 years. 40 years. No one knows why anybody lives. No one knows why anybody lives long. Living long, Rabbi Say, does not mean living long in numbers. Living long, Rabbi Say, means living with a wife for 65 years. As was mentioned so many times, living long means having children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that are following in your ways. That's what living long means. Living long does not mean living in a big house in the burbs with a lot of money, and at the end of your life, you're lost because there are so many bedrooms and no one's filling them. That's not living long. Living long is having your children and grandchildren want to be with you. That's living long. Then, Mr. Loskove came to me with a few shilas. I tell you the truth, it was the same thing. Mr. Loskove, it's all right. No, is it really all right? I don't want to do it. What was the question? As we mentioned before, he was in pain. His hands, he was in pain. And he wanted to know, when he stood right here, for duchen, because he couldn't make it up the steps. And he stood there for duchen. The only person to duchen was his son and 2 sets of grandchildren. That was the corner over here. The Loskove Silverstein corner. And he came to me with tears. He can't hold up his hands. Can he put his hands on a stender? I said, Mr. Loskove, you could do whatever you want. The man was in such pain. Can he put a stender there? And he couldn't get his talus over his head. Could he do it with, somebody else put the talus, as I mentioned before, could he do it without the talus on his head? They're unbelievable questions. So I'm thinking, Gemara says in Megillah, it's a very strange Gemara. Gemara says in Megillah of Chav Zayin and Beis, Amar Arachti Yom, a number of Gedolim, Tanoim, Amoraim were asked, why did you live so long? So they asked Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua, Amar Arachti Yom, why did you live so long? So among the things he says is, the last thing he says is, well, in Asasi Kapai, I did not duchen b'loi bracha, without making a bracha. So, everybody asked the question. Rishonim and Machloim, what do you mean? He lived a long time because he duchen without a bracha. He didn't duchen without a bracha. You have to make a bracha before you duchen. Somebody say, I lived a long time because before I ate an apple, I made a bracha. You have to make a bracha. That's not what you live a long time if you do what you have to do. So I was thinking, and this morning I went back to the house to look, and a few more saw him, and Baruch Hashem, I found the teretz that I had said. I didn't want to say the teretz without finding it. You know, there's only one bracha that you make that does not say this word simply, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Hasheker yishalom v'tzoysos zivanu, l'hadlik ner shel Shabbos. Every woman makes that bracha. Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Hasheker yishalom v'tzoysos zivanu, l'haniach tefillin. By Kahanim, you make a bracha, Baruch Atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, Asher kiddushanu v'kedushaso shel Am. You add an extra phrase. Tzivanu l'varach es am Yisrael. I was wondering, last night I said to Michael, I want to know your father's name. So he told me he doesn't, I'm sure he doesn't remember. He said, Meir Yosef ben Osher HaKoyim. Most people wouldn't tell me their father's name. I also told me he's a Koyim, with such emphasis. And it's not because he was a Gabbai for many. Asher Kiddishanu b'Kedusha shel Aaron, I'm wondering, also Ben Shemua said like this, I never duchened without thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I'm a Koyim. Being a Kohen is a bracha. Being a Kohen is a special bracha. And he loved that bracha. And he cherished that bracha. Because he was mechabe the inyan of kahuna. He gave honor to the fact that the Kadosh Baruch Hu gave him a bracha that he's a Kohen. "91 years. As I said so eloquently, not many people are zeicha to have grandparents for such a long time. And those people who are zeicha are very often in our society not zeicha to have grandparents who are married such a long time. They may have grandparents not married for 65 years. I was so happy to hear how much they loved each other and how much affection they had for each other. Because very often, not very often, I was called because, they were in a disagreement, Mr. and Mrs. Loskove, about, I don't even remember what they were in a disagreement about. But, there were different questions that, who was right, you think I'm going to pass it, who's right, and who's wrong, But rather language with that. But this is an incredible bracha. Incredible bracha. Incredible bracha to have that all your children and grandchildren, when you grew up without any education, should be all Shomer Shabbos. Who can take that for granted? And not only that, but I was told that his brothers, children, and grandchildren, great-grandchildren are also Shomer Shabbos. Because there was this couple born in Memphis in 1908. The grandparents, born in 1908 in Memphis.
His sister too.
Sister too.
His sister too.
And they all have from descendants. We're standing here by a funeral of celebrating, talking about a life of miracles. Miracles. And I am not picking or differentiating with any of the grandchildren, but I must tell you, when I flew to Lakewood for Moshe's wedding, and there they were dancing, and they had all the grandparents sitting in a row, and everybody was dancing around the grandfathers. And there's Mr. Loskove from Memphis, born in whatever year it was, 32 or 33. He's sitting there next to the Paisik of Lakewood, Rabbi Yaakov Forshon, next to Rabbi Gershon Weiss. And I keep on telling Michael Chassid, this doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Look who this man is sitting next to. It was Lakewood, otherwise he should have put Mrs. Loskove there in the same room. Because she deserves the same thing. Edmonton also was not a thriving community over there. Not at all. So, this is a Levaya of a Kohen, who was Machshiv Talmidei Chacham. He was Machshiv, as was said, from the get-go of all the Maspidim. He gave prominence and chashivas to the halacha. He gave prominence and chashivas to Talmidei Chachamim. And he gave prominence and chashivas to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I feel like I'm being masbid a Rebbe. The translation of a Rebbe is a mentor and a person you learn from. Don't think that there's a person in this room who can say that they haven't learned, either because they dealt with Mr. Loskove or because they're finding out right now about Mr. Loskove. Mr. Loskove was a gem. He was unusual, he was incredible. And he tells everybody in Klal Yisrael, I grew up in Memphis. I grew up in Memphis. And I made it. Not by my bank account. My father, Shalom, used to carry us up the stairs. I told you this. 3rd floor, walk up in Crown Heights. And he had many virtues, my father. Singing was not one of them. And he would sing in his melodious way. I'm a very wealthy man, even though I have no money. Because I have wonderful children and a wonderful wife. That's the lesson. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. What's important to us is what is sitting here. What an unbelievable display. What is important to us is what's sitting in there. And what was important to him was his ability to duchen with his son, his grandchildren, who was incredibly important. And as a result of that, he's the millionaire, he's the billionaire, he's the trillionaire. Because this is where it really all counts. He should be a military for his family. During this time, he should be a military for Klal Yisrael. Mr. Loskove is hearing what we're saying. You can tell him, Mr. Loskove, you're allowed to go to the Kisei HaKovod and say, Hashem, I made it. Despite being raised in Memphis, please Hashem, help Klal Yisrael in this time of need. Help my family, as we heard so well. It's so funny because my father was much bigger than Mr. Loskove. He was 6'2" and big. And he always said the same thing, you can start with anybody, but don't mess with my family. Whoa, there must have been the Lower East Side of Memphis were connected. I don't know how was that. Family, what a legacy you have to carry on. You should be zeicher to do it, and b'schus that, you should be zeicher to Atzlacha Rabbah. Yila Hashem, Yila Hamos Netzach, Moch Hashem Dima Me'al Kol Panim. We're going to make the Kil Moli. Try as much as you want.
El Mother Achamim, Sheikhim Bamramim, Hamzim Mucha Chana, Akanfea Shchina, Balois Kreishim, Tairim, Kazar Harakia, Masiris Nishmas, Mir Yosef Ben Oshra, Kain Shalach, Lelamai, Bavor Shemishpachta, Yitmut Staka Baskars Nishmasai, Yan Ein Tim Chasai, Lachain Balarachamim, Yasir B'Seiser Knafa Loilamim, Yitzhar v'tzarech emes nishmasoi, Adonai v'nachlasoi, v'nuach v'shkoinal mishkavoi, v'neimar amen.
Friends, this concludes our service here at the Shul. Interment will take place immediately at the family plot at Shul Memorial Park. Upon return from the cemetery, the family will be sitting Shiva at the Loskove residence, 6833 North Kedzie, Unit 1. Is that 1115? Is that 115?
115.
For more information, including meeting times, please visit the funeral home website. Memorial contributions in Mr. Loskove's memory can be made to the Chicago Chesed Fund or to the Chicago Center. In just a few moments, we will have a procession forming just in the Shul parking lot, going alongside Tui facing heading west. If you're joining the procession, please make sure you obtain an orange funeral safety sticker to place on the inside portion of your car, as well as an orange funeral safety sticker to place on the rooftop portion of your vehicle. Please make sure your bright headlights and your hazard lights are on at all times, and please drive as closely to the car in front of you as safety permits. The following individuals have been honored to serve as pallbearers when we get to the cemetery, if you can meet at the back of the hearse. Yaakov Olovich, Elliot Bernstein, Joshua Bernstein, Jonathan Bernstein, Lior Kushner, and Yosef Goldblatt. We're now going to have an opportunity for those who wish to be Malava, the mace in the Shul parking lot towards Tui in just a few moments. I understand not all the grandchildren will be able to be at the cemetery. Please allow for the family to come just this way back to the small base centers. Thank you.